everybody. I am Andy Welfle. I'm a UX content strategy manager at Adobe in San Francisco. And with me is Michael Metz. Say hi, Michael.
Hello.
Michael is a senior UX architect at Allstate, focused on conversation design. He's based in the Chicago area. And we use he, him pronouns. So I'm going to start us off a little bit talking about, why can't I advance my slides? There we go, about kind of the big principles of the book, Why Writing is Designing. Go through some of the principles of good UX writing. And Michael is going to talk about an example from the book around error messages and how we can treat them as opportunities. And then we have a little activity for you. Don't worry, you're not going to have to get into groups or anything. Just something kind of fun to approach this like how we try to approach it. So let's start off. Writing is designing. So we're going to kind of go into what this means a little bit. I think that probably we're preaching to the choir here, but hopefully we can give you some rhetoric and some ammunition for your own jobs in trying to convince people of this. So this is an example I always like to give, and a lot of people find this pretty powerful. You take a digital experience, you take an app or a website or something. And in this case, it's DoorDash, food delivery app, which I think most of us are probably familiar with. And all you have to do is take out all the words. And you can see that in this experience and in many others, this app is suddenly just unusable without the words. You can kind of see, there's an illustration on the first page of what this thing does. Maybe there is on the second screen here. You have icons at the bottom that kind of represent your architecture, but your taxonomy. But it's not like it's not super clear about what these things are. And the third screen, like there's a map and maybe there's some buttons, but we're not sure about what those do. So this just kind of goes to show that, without words, apps and digital experiences would be unusable. And honestly, it goes the other way too. Often without flows and designs and structure, words are not super usable. So in our jobs, we're gonna talk about UX writing a lot. We really try to divorce the words, the roles from the responsibilities. So there's a big debate over what is UX writing, what is content design, content strategy, UX content strategy, all those. We're going to be talking about writers on a design team and just kind of keep it simple that way. So in the jobs that we're doing, we really need to team up writing and designing in your brain to work together. I'll kind of get into an example in a bit of what that kind of means. So if any of you are familiar with Nicole Fenton, she's the co-author of a book called Nicely Said, and somebody who's been hugely influential to us in our work. I'm going to just kind of paraphrase here. She says, "I don't write fiction or short stories. I use language to solve problems, whether that's behind the scenes or in the product itself. I use word as material." So that's from an article she wrote on her blog. We'll send out a link to the slide deck with source material, so you can check this out. But this is kind of the thesis statement of what we're all here for. So she really just sums it up really well. We design with words. We use words as design material. Let's check out an example of that. So at Adobe, I am often presented with something like this, and I have a designer who says, "Hey, Andy, we have this button. What should the button say?" I'm like, okay, let me look at it. And I think about this button, and I think of like the writer side of my brain says, well, what are the right words for this button? If this is a continuing, like a flow to finish something up, like to confirm, is it done? Is it continue? Is it finish? Is it complete? And then all of a sudden I have all these other questions. The UX writer, the designer side of my brain starts kind of firing, and it says, well, what are the entry and exit points for this button? What actions immediately follow pressing this button? And are we even using the right messaging component here? Should this be a confirmation dialogue, or should this be a toast, or should this be inline text, something else? What's the inverse action for the words that we're using? How does it translate and localize? Does it fit within kind of our broader strategy? Really, we really need to see this button in context with the rest of the message, or even some before and after entry and exit point screens. So really, this is about, writing is about fitting words together. Designing is about solving problems for your users. And so that's kind of like what is teaming up in your head. That's why we say that we're designing with words. This next thing is not kind of a concept that is that is original to me or to us. You know, this is a really great this is a really great sort of concept from a book called The Elements of User Experience by Jesse James Garrett. And if any of you were in attending the SOFA conference recently, Jonathan Coleman gave a talk that had kind of a similar construct in here. But they talk about how, you know, there's these layers of UX that goes kind of from the most abstract to the most concrete, and about how things kind of like build on top of each other in this. You know, we have the strategy, the reason behind why we're creating something. We have the scope of what we're doing. We have a system, which is like the skeleton and the structure. You know, how the system behaves and how users interact. We have that surface level of how things will look, feel, and sound. So, you know, a lot of people can relate this pretty well to visual design deliverables, right? There's a design strategy, there's design system stuff, and there's like the screens, right? Like the actual the mocks and the prototypes. But really, there are content design deliverables at every step along the way, right? Like we have the content strategy as the base level, the reason, you know, how to manage and plan and create the content across the product. Visual design and content design all have timelines and deliverables and roadmaps and things like that. Content design also has system level guidelines. So that's our style guide. We have grammar and mechanics. We talk about content patterns. We talk about terminology. And then at the top level, along with the screens, we have the UX writing. So the microcopy and the buttons and the dialogues and the errors and all that stuff, the actual words that go into it. So this is all to say that it's just all intermingled and inextricable from each other here. So if words are such an important part of design, why do we so often think of design in terms of visual tools, right? You know, Figma, Adobe XD, Sketch, origami, you know, all of these tools that let you draw triangles or rectangles, I don't know my shapes today, on a screen. And they do let you put words there, but often there's not very good word management or kind of like, you know, text editors there. So think about something like this. You know, Google Home, like a voice interface. Do you use Sketch, Figma, or XD Design for this interface? Or do you use a text editor, which is, you know, a great tool for prototyping, you know, purely like speech interfaces? So this is all to say that we have all these deliverables, but really, you know, you don't want to mistake making a deliverable with making a difference. This is something from our book and something we really dig into. So so what does it mean to make a difference there? How do you know that your words are making a difference and are making an impact and are successful? We talk about three, excuse me just a second. I need to exit out because I cannot advance my screen. Okay, there we go. So you really want your writing to be, we have three principles that we really try to dig into. We want our writing to be usable, useful, and responsible. And we'll get into a little bit what each of those means in just a moment. Okay. Having a little bit of a slide advancing problem. All right, here we go. Let's talk about usable first. What does usable mean and how is it different than useful? Basically, it means, you know, we want to help users do stuff. This is a real life example from an Adobe product that somebody in my team worked on. So if you have a Creative Cloud subscription, you may use a little mobile app called the Creative Cloud mobile app. And in there you can browse tutorials and you can search to find things like tutorials. And so if you're digging through a list of tutorials, let's say about Photoshop, when you get to the bottom of the list, you used to be faced with this little string that says, not finding what you're looking for? Tap on the search icon next to your profile picture, which is useful, right? Like it's telling you that, like, hey, if you want to find more of this stuff, look at the top where the search icon is and tap that. But really, why do we want to, like, you know, tell people when we can show people? We can just bring people right to that experience. So Marissa, our content strategist, changed that up to say, hey, use search to find more tutorials, and then made the search word clickable or tappable. So it's a really good example of just, you know, shortening this and making it something that can be used by users. And of course the design team thought that she was magic, right? Like she shortened the string by more than a half, and she actually, like, just summarized and said what needed to be said there. This is the kind of wordsmithing magic that I think a lot of people, that comes naturally to a lot of writers, but to designers often just do not, just think is amazing. So something you want to do is just figure out if people can use the words you've written. And there's lots of ways to do that. There's prototyping words, there's user testing it. Sarah Richards, the author of Content Design, if anybody's read that book, really, really good book, says that if the words that you write for someone aren't accessible to everyone, you've made a design choice that prevents people from using that thing. One of her things that she says is, it's not dumbing something down by making it accessible. It's opening it up, which is really kind of a powerful thing to think about. We talk about a cognitive psychologist in our book named Dr. Melanie Polkowski. She conducted a study with 821 participants about customer service behavior, and what is what is the most important aspects of customer service to people. And the 4 most important usability factors out of 76 different factors included things that were related to UX writing, to things that we control and that we talk about. So she said customer service behavior included items that were related to the friendliness and the politeness of the system, its speaking pace, and its use of familiar terms, which are all things that we control. So we talk about like voice and tone standards. We talk about the use of jargon and making something just readable. And then speaking pace is very much related to just sort of like brevity and consistency. So think about like IVR phone trees that you've gotten stuck in and just have not just been able to kind of like work your way out of. Those are all things that a UX writer or a content strategist or a content designer can affect. So Dr. Pekulski went on to say in our book, human communication is the most important gift we have, whether it's through speech or through writing. I really do think that human beings are worth fighting for, especially as technology overtakes more and more of what it means to be human. So also we want to make sure that our writing is useful. So look at something like this, right? This is for Grand Malia Hotels and Resorts. And when you're signing up for their loyalty program, you might see a screen like this. And let's just kind of dig into this a little bit. So that first part, you're opting in. You're saying, hey, yes, I want to register for the loyalty program. Yes, I want to receive information about special offers and promotions from Malia.com. Oh, if you do not want to receive commercial information, click here. And then you also have a check mark that's opting out and saying, I do not want to receive advertisements. So this is super confusing. And you can just see how this happened, right? Like you had a PM go up to the design team and say, hey, you know what? We need to make this GDPR compliant. Let's slap I do not want to receive advertisements, just opt in on here. And they didn't really think about the full experience. So this is a super kind of like confusing flow to go through. Are you opting into receiving information and special offers, or you're opting out of receiving advertisements? Here's an example of something that is useful. Pinterest's terms of service. Has anybody here actually read the terms of service on Pinterest or any other site? They have a little aside under each section called More Simply Put, where they kind of like sum up what you're agreeing to in plain language. So, you have kind of legal messaging at the top, and at the bottom they just say, hey, Pinterest has links to contents off of Pinterest. That stuff is awesome, but we're not responsible when it's not. How could you make this even more useful is you could make the actual language itself a little bit more user-friendly and in plain language. But as many of us probably know, there's a lot of legal barriers to doing that. They want to be very precise, and they want to kind of protect themselves, from liability. So this is kind of a good workaround, I think, for it, and something that I think a lot of terms of service out there could really benefit from. So really, all this to say, writers need to understand a product's purpose and the user's need in order to create useful experiences. So thinking about that first example from Malia Resorts and Hotels, if a writer was involved in that, they were brought in kind of last minute to just kind of slap a second check mark on there. When it's clear that on that second screen, that second experience, a writer was there from sort of the formation of this to make sure that this thing is happening. We interviewed a really talented designer and writer for the book named Katie Lauer. She says that I feel like I always need the full context of what I'm solving for. So it's best in my work when I can be in environments where I can get it. If you're joining a project at the very end and there's a very low tolerance for questions, it's a sign that your role as a writer hasn't been well positioned or maybe isn't well understood. So that is that is for sure, something that I think is common for many of us. Last but not least, your writing should be responsible. This is important. We have a duty to our users. Think about something like this, right? Like many of us, I think most of us have probably used LinkedIn messaging, and often you see these little canned responses at the bottom. This is something that Michael faced and screenshotted and put here. So he noticed that one of his friends on LinkedIn was laid off from their job. So Michael, being the very nice guy he was, reached out and said, "Hey, I'm so sorry to hear what happened. If I can help in any way, please reach out." And that person responded and says, "Hey, thanks a ton. I appreciate the support. I'm taking a couple days to process everything. We'll start the job hunt next week." So, you can respond to that. You have a few canned messages here. You have "good luck," which is like, okay, fine. You have "sounds good," which is pretty mild. And then you have "congratulations," which is, just sort of tacky at best and harmful at worst, right? Like if Michael accidentally tapped that, he could have really damaged his relationship with this person. And this is a really mild example of how, kind of machine learning can inject stuff like this and just make it really easy to just screw something up. I don't know if any of you have read Technically Wrong by Sarah Wachter-Becher. She is really great designer, content strategist, activist. She actually wrote the foreword for our book. She has so many more examples of these that are just ridiculous. In something that is, a little bit just kind of like bigger and more complicated in a harmful way, think about something like Fitbit, right? Like, so you are filling out your profile information in Fitbit. You go through, you put in your name, you put in your birthday, you put in your gender, you put in your location, your height, your weight, your stride, that kind of stuff. So, when I'm a, cisgender, straight white male, choosing the sex option here is a really easy choice for me. It's really quick. Think about the experience that a trans woman might have. So we actually, did this. We talked to a activist in the UX community named Ada Powers. Some of you may be familiar with her on Twitter. She's really amazing. And she's a trans woman. And we talked about this with her in the book. And she says, so, I want to get the most out of my Fitbit. So I really want to understand where they're coming from. So normally I'd assume that they're awkwardly asking about my gender, and I would just answer female, right, for like demographic information. But also within Fitbit's page, they also ask for my height and weight. So maybe they're looking for biological information rather than demographic information. So like, should I answer male because of my supposed chromosomes? Or should I answer female because the dominant sex hormone in my body is estrogen? This is in Ada Powers' words. But really, it gets even more complicated than that. So if Ada answers female, do they assume that she's interested in period tracking? But what if it was a cis woman who doesn't have a uterus or has one that doesn't function in a normative way? So do they use it to assume hormone levels for like calorie burning models? But what about people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which can cause relatively higher levels of testosterone in their body? So all this to say is this is a very, very confusing experience for a lot of people. Ada says if they were thinking about inclusivity, they'd really understand that some questions don't have easy answers. So by explaining what they want to know and why, it not only helps people on the margins like me, but anyone who may not be easily categorized and gets them in even better quality information to act on. It's a win-win for the user and for the company. Another really great designer we interviewed, Natalie Yi, says this, right? Like, we know that words can really hurt people or give them, or help them in their personal lives. We can say reassuring words to people and it has a huge impact. We can say hurtful words and it has a years-long impact. But we really don't often treat the words we write in an interface that way, right? So like, how could Fitbit have been better about, that language? Maybe it's like distinguishing between gender and like sex, or maybe it's giving context, right? Like, this is from, do you all in Seattle have One Medical? This is a doctor's office chain in San Francisco. Okay, it looks like maybe it's there. When you're filling out their intake form, they ask for sex, and this is very wordy, but they're trying to just give you some context. They're trying to tell you why we need this information, right? Like there's legal and insurance reasons why they're asking for this information here. And they also kind of like go take another step, and they have a place to enter more information about your gender that you want to make sure that your medical team knows. Kind of like how in Lyft recently they added the ability to kind of add your own pronouns. So finally, I'll wrap this up and then pass it over to Michael, just by saying, like, think about the idea of a news feed, right? So this isn't just Facebook's news feed. This is many products out there have the idea of a news feed, a blog as a news feed, really. We interviewed Jorge Arango, author of Living Information, has a really great book, really great podcast. He says that news is the feedback mechanism of our society. We vote based on the things we learn in the news. When we take a concept on that and we subvert it for commercial use, that's something that should give you pause. So just think about that. If you are a UX writer, if you're a content designer, if you're a content strategist, if you're affecting the words in digital products, you have a responsibility in your hands, and it's something that we probably shouldn't take lightly. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael now to take over, and he is going to talk about error messages and stress cases. And you are muted, Michael.
Thanks a bunch, Andy.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start the screen share here. Just a reminder that if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat as things come up, and we'll go through them at the end of the talk. And Andy is going to be lurking in the chat for sure, so he can also chime in. So yeah, let's talk about errors. And notice I haven't gotten to error messages yet. That's because errors happen separately from the messages. An error is typically a condition in software that we have to address. And usually the way people address it is with a message. So let's talk about an unfortunately true story from my career, where I came in to the office groggy, just ready to, open up Sketch and look at some designs. And the lead engineer came over to me and said, "We've got this error that we need you to check. Can you just edit it? And we have to actually put in production today. So if you could just take a look before we put it in production, that'd be great. We missed this case." But anyways, the security team said that when people enter their birth date, if their birth date is more than 100 years of age, we have to throw an error. So what we have in there right now is, please check the birth date and try again. Can you just check that for us and let us know what you think? And it was like 8:30. I hadn't had all of my coffee, maybe half of my coffee. And it was, eventually I realized, just looking at this message, please check the birth date and try again. There's no way words would solve this problem. There's absolutely no way. Because what if someone who is 100 or older was trying to sign up for this service that we were all building? They would just keep entering their birth date over and over again, and the system would keep showing an error. And so I guess it was, as I dug into it, I kept asking questions. Needless to say, I did not get the message done by the end of the day, like they needed it. I kept asking questions, and it turned out to be an archaic security principle because they didn't want malicious code being injected into the birth date field. So they made up a security guideline that said 100 years or older, throw an error message so people don't put erroneous information into the birth date field. And this just sparked a whole bunch of conversations with the security team. Why are you doing this? There are thousands of people in our country that you're marketing this product to that are 100 years of age or older. And that kind of speaks to, I think, one of the most important things about UX writing, that sometimes the most important impact you can have in your work is asking questions and digging into why things are the way they are. And not just writing what you're assigned, but talking it through and being aligned as a team about the impact you're having and who you might be excluding and all those important things. And I would also emphasize when it comes to errors that we should really be thinking in terms of stress cases as defined by Sarah Wachter-Boettcher, we already mentioned, and Eric Meyer in their book, Design for Real Life. In that book, they talk about how the term edge case is loaded to indicate that the people who fall into that edge case aren't really worth caring about as a team. And that is a really harmful assumption to make. It's really important to think in terms of what could go wrong and ask those questions as you write these messages and tackle these different cases. So when it comes to errors, I always find it helpful to help my teams think about what our users are actually doing in real life. So here are some examples that you might have to write error messages for. So maybe you have a highly stressed parent trying to find the right medicine for their sick child. Maybe you have a newly engaged couple trying to figure out how to request a marriage license. Or you have a student trying to look up their scores on a university website for their tests. Or maybe a driver who was recently in a wreck trying to schedule their repairs and pay for them. The common thing you'll notice about all these scenarios is that in none of these situations is the person's goal, I want to use software, right? Like they're not saying, I want to use a website right now. I want to use a mobile app. They're focused on something else. And the software is just what's between them and getting that thing done. So what I urge people to do when we talk about errors is to recognize what they are. And errors are moments, really, in time where the needs of your users are conflicting with the needs of your system. They're trying to get something done. I have heard, unfortunately, people describe errors as moments where people are using the system wrong, right? I don't know if any of you have ever heard that before, but it happens, unfortunately, often. And that's a really harmful way to look at it, because if people are doing that, that should be a design challenge for the entire team to figure out how we can help people accomplish what they set out to do. So let's look at a quote from a really great book. This is a quote by Kathy Sierra, and Kathy is talking about how to get people to like and recommend your software. So Kathy says, where you find sustained success driven by recommendations, you find badass users, smarter, more skillful, more powerful users who know more and can do more in a way that's personally meaningful. And to me, that's what we should be shooting for when we tackle an error. We should be shooting to actually help our users be awesome, as Kathy says. This is a great book. I highly recommend it. So we have 3 principles in the book for errors, and we're going to actually do an exercise in just a few minutes where you can try this out, and we'll talk it through. So the principles we have are avoid, explain, and resolve. And let's look at how this might play out. And I'll give an example scenario of making check deposits through a mobile app. And this is incredibly relevant now. I had no idea how relevant it would be when we put it in the book, but it's now significantly more dangerous to go to a bank, right? So people are using this feature far more than they used to. But even before COVID-19, Bank of America said more people were depositing checks through their mobile app than through physical branches. So this has a technology that has really taken off. So let's look at how the principles avoid, explain, and resolve can apply in one of these flows. And the one I'm going to look at is Chase Bank. So this is for a bank account that I had. And I just went through it and noticed some things about how the team had designed it. Now, I'm not on Chase Bank's design team, but so I'm making some assumptions. But let's dissect it. Let's talk about it. You'll notice in this first screen, the next button isn't active until someone enters an amount. So they actually have avoided the need for an error when you enter an amount of 0, right? They can't deposit a check for nothing. So that would be an error state. And they've avoided it by making the form progressively activated as you enter an amount. So the deposit amount field is like very visually prominent up there in the front, and it kind of teaches you how to use the app. Okay, you start with the amount you're going to put in. However, it doesn't completely save them from having an error case. So if you enter an amount and you delete it, then it does show an error. So it says, please tell us an amount. And one other thing that is really important is that you have to be very careful how this is actually coded, because if you're disabling UI components, that's all well and good for a sighted user. But if someone is using a screen reader, for this app, and those elements are disabled and they have no indication that they're even there, it may not make sense. So really important to use caution when doing something like this. Next up, let's look at how they explain. So say you have a really great day and someone gives you a check for $15,000 and you try to deposit it. The error you get is this is over your deposit limit, and then there's some subtext there that says your current mobile deposit limit is $10,000. Okay, that's great. It explained it really clearly. The mobile deposit limit is $10,000. I can't deposit any more than that. That's great. Some things that could complicate it is that it doesn't tell the user what to do next. So is this deposit limit different if I go to an ATM? Do I actually need to go to a bank during bank hours to deposit this? It would be kind of a bummer if I took the check to an ATM and then got the same error message there, right? So, it doesn't really explain why there's this deposit limit or, what deposit limits are for or why they exist, So it seems kind of arbitrary. So one thing to help with in a situation like this to figure out the right fidelity of information, the right amount, is to test with users. Specifically test your error messages. Test unusability testing when things are going wrong and see how people respond to that information. And finally, let's look at the resolve case. So in this case, they have this really cool feature where it detects a check in the camera and just takes the picture right away. So you don't even have to put in the effort to press the button to take the picture. It does it for you. But again, like keeping in mind that principle we had before, no one comes to this app saying, I really want to try auto capture. They come to the app saying, I want to deposit my check. So props to the team for, when this auto capture feature fails, offering a different option. You can use the manual capture option, or you can retry that automatic option again. So that's great. Like it's really important as you roll out new features. If you're not sure how useful they'll be, to offer moments like this where the system fails gracefully. So that brings us to our activity. And we'll give just like 5 minutes to work on this, I think. And we're going to look at this scenario. And I encourage you to just take a moment to read through that scenario. And we're not even going to write error messages. We're just going to write ideas about how you can avoid, explain, or resolve the error. I know many of you, no doubt, have questions about this scenario and about all the constraints. I would encourage you to just make them up. Make up your own constraints. This is an imaginary team, imaginary problem. So let's maybe take 5 minutes for all of you to work on it. And if you are so willing, post what you come up with in the chat, and we'll be picking a few people to share what they come up with. So we'd really love it if you actually post your results in the chat. And I'm actually going to call on Katie first. Do you want to share what you came up with?
Sure, yeah. So I had said, I think a lot of folks agree with this, fortunately, that I would try and really front load this question. So, it kind of takes the load off of it. If you've wasted someone's time by asking this late in the flow, they're probably going to be more upset. And then I would also try and offer up the workaround, however it would be phrased, that like, hey, that doesn't mean it's a dead end. If you can get your parent or guardian's consent, we might be able to work a deal here.
That's great. I think that is a really common one that we see in this activity, and it's great because you wouldn't lose the sale completely that way. You could say, go get your parent or guardian, they can help you out with this. So I'm thinking of like the 16-year-old who's is told, you have your car now, go get your insurance, and then they find out they can't without their parents. Neat. Okay, Ivan, are you comfortable speaking up and sharing?
Hi, sure. So I thought you might have a pull down that has just starting with 2012 or whatever the year is, 18 from today, and then just so that'll means you'll never have someone picking the wrong year. You don't have to have any interaction with that, and you could explain it by saying that, hey, you're under 18. Thanks for coming, but we can't sell you any insurance yet. Sign up for, start the user process now, start that journey, get their information, And then you can follow up with them with safe driving tips. And you know, the minute they turn 18, I mean, if someone's that keen on getting behind the wheel, you'll be ready for them.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Ivan. Really appreciate you sharing that. All right, let's do one more. Let's go with Maru. Are you willing to share?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
I hope my English will be okay. I'm from Argentina. I was just thinking in a line with a little bit humor, you know, something like, we are sorry, you can't have that account. It's a law. In your 18th birthday, we will be waiting for you.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, I love the friendly tone and also the fact that you've clearly explained why this is happening. It's due to the law. It's not really in the company's hands. Yeah,
exactly.
This is neat. Great. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I just want to ask if anyone else is comfortable just talking about what was it like to think about an error without writing the message, but to think about all these things surrounding the error. What was that like for any of you?
I'd be happy to share my thoughts. I thought it was actually really freeing. It's not an exercise that I've participated in with errors much before, so it's usually it's like write pen to paper. So I thought it was super helpful to just think about it much more freely.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else have thoughts that went through your mind as you did this?
I'll jump in. I work at a startup, so there's not a lot of writers floating around, so I kind of help with some of the UX content as a technical writer, and it was kind of helpful and interesting to think of it in terms of not like an error caused by the user, but like other ways to address it instead of just being like, oh shoot, they did something, it's caused a problem, like what would I say to them? I think it was helpful, like reframing of the issue.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Appreciate it. And we had one more person in the middle with your hand up. Sorry, I don't see the name. Yeah, go right ahead.
So I would kind of align with Mallory on that. I always think, well, as you said, errors are an opportunity. And so how you find a way to not have the person come away with a complex of like, I'm doing it wrong, it's not good, and ultimately go away, finding a way to be inclusive and bring them in and make things flow to, I really like the idea that Katie had of getting a parent to co-sign, or if a parent is already a member, something like that. But again, finding ways to encourage a successful outcome. I think that starts to build right out of the gate a longer term relationship with the brand.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, both of you. That really makes a lot of sense to me, because the way I would approach these for a long time in my career was kind of going back to what Katie said, just starting to write, right? Just doing what I was tasked with writing. And honestly, it didn't take long, right? Like we did this in 5 minutes. So it's not even about the time. Often it's often about just giving yourself the space and helping, just giving yourself sometimes even the permission mentally to explore opportunities and possibilities for something like this. Cool. So again, what we talked about today, we talked about how writing is designing. That's what Andy was going through, and talking about how it's important for your writing to be usable, useful, and responsible. And we talked about how errors are opportunities, and you can avoid, explain, and resolve errors for your users. So that is actually it. We did have time, I think, for some Q&A. Correct me if I'm wrong, Paula, but I think...
Oh yeah, we've got time. So I don't know if you want to kind of look through the chat. There's been a lot of activity, or if anything sort of caught your eye there, or if I think we
Yeah.
could probably just let people speak up too. But maybe Andy, if there were a few that you
Yeah,
flagged.
I have like 2 or 3 we can go through here. The first one was one that somebody very smart asked, and there were several plus ones to that question, and that was your question, Paula. Do you wanna ask that?
Sure. I think I just you were the slide about news. It maybe just wasn't entirely clear to me kind of what the concern would be with referring to something as a news feed, for example, or news, because I think like a lot of sites, the one that I work on, we have an area that we call news and events, and so I was thinking, is there some concern about what really qualifies as news, or what is the issue with news?
Yeah, that was a great interview with Jorge, and I love the book that he wrote, because it gets into a lot of these topics. But he was specifically calling out Facebook in that quote. On Facebook, you have the news feed. So he talked about, if you take each of those words separately, start with feed, for example. Feed implies nourishment. It implies a good thing. It implies something coming your way, helping you grow. The news, he talked about how news for a long time was something that had a lot of rigor involved, right? So you had news organizations that had been around for maybe hundreds of years in some cases, and had a reputation that they were trying to uphold, and fact checking and all those things that were involved. And he talked about how on Facebook you have, in the news feed, you could see something from the Washington Post, which is of organizations, right alongside a website that had been put up yesterday and had no such rigor applied to it. And so he talked about how for people mentally, when they associate news with something like that, and they see those two things side by side, treated the same way in the Facebook news feed, that's something that should give us pause, right? It should give us a moment of reflection of, is this being subverted? That's the word he used. Is this being subverted for commercial use, the concept of news? And is it causing harm in some ways? And I think, I don't know if we have a direct study of that term being linked to it, but we certainly have plenty of evidence that that kind of harm is happening through Facebook.
That's interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah. Misleading people to believe.
Yeah. We had another good question from Jessica Devine. Jessica, are you on here and want to unmute and ask your question? I can also read it for you if you'd rather.
I typed in a couple. Which one were you? Which one were you looking at?
I was going on the list of the first one about button text. I'm happy to talk about that, but if you have another one too, we can totally do that.
Yeah. Well, I've got two, but one is just, if you could, since you opened the door on button text, I would really just love to hear any additional best practices that you know of about, making them more narrative or less narrative, or given the context of everything that you laid out on your slide, how do you then think about what's appropriate? Yeah.
So in the book we have a chapter about tone, kind of the difference between voice and tone. And one of the things we talked about is, in different parts of your digital experience, be they apps or websites or whatever, like there's more or less opportunity for providing sort of like a richness of tone, like intensity of tone. And you have some things like, headlines and paragraphs where you can take on kind of an intense expression of tone and, really dig into sort of like, the thing you're trying to say, and find some nuance and find some nuance in like how you're saying it. But buttons are kind of one of the things where, especially like call to action buttons, right? Like buttons that, you click on to do something. That's something where you really have less tolerance and less kind of really desire to be really, to really infuse something with a richness of tones. Like you should always be very clear and straightforward when you can. I usually really caution people, especially working in like marketing organizations, about like confirm shaming, if you're familiar with that, which is where, you go to a website where it's like, hey, sign up for our loyalty program and save 15%. And, there's a big button that says sign up, and there's a button underneath that says, no, I really hate saving money. And that's, you see that a lot. That is a bad practice and something that I would really, really, suggest people try to argue against or get away from, just because it's shaming the user and it's being kind of deceptive. So I usually suggest, if the Adobe standards, for example, we usually say, less than 4 words or 25 characters is for call to action buttons. And that's, sometimes we have to break it. I really, really dislike doing, multiple actions in one button. So like save and continue or save and quit, because, you should really try to be breaking up these like actions into different flows. And then I guess finally, just like consistency across everything is good, right? Like if you have a huge piece of software with a lot of like technical things, like kind of like limiting, just for consistency's sake, the kind of actions that you're doing. Like sometimes if you say, next, and sometimes you say forward, and sometimes you say, go to the next step or something like that, trying to just like really shore those up into just a few words, I think are good. So that's kind of the best practices that I have. And I know best practices can differ, depending on your context and organizations, but those are kind of the rules of thumb I try to follow.
That was really helpful. Thank you.
Anything to add to that, Michael?
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned, so it's so funny. It's one of the fun things about writing a book with someone is that you get to like debate some of these things back and forth. And so like I would say it's interesting. We've never talked about combining actions into a button before, but there are some times when I think that can be a really good idea. So I would say like a really important thing, that's me speaking, not Andy.
How dare you?
I know, right? I think what's really important is that you're aligned with your strategy, be it experience principles or whatever your team is trying to accomplish, trying to be aligned and making sure that you're achieving those things as a team, because there's a whole lot of subjectivity. I have been in multiple 1-hour meetings debating using buy versus purchase, right? Like at the end of the day, it's really funny how much time people spend on that stuff. So like strategic tenets of what you're trying to go after are really important, because a lot of it does end up just being subjective without really a right or wrong answer. So building a narrative and explaining why you're doing it based on user evidence, based on your strategic goals, all those things. I think that's really important too.
Yeah. Jess, do you want to ask your second question, or do you want to skip ahead?
I mean, I don't want to be greedy, but my second question was to ask about just advice around how a company can create their voice for their digital platform.
Good. That is a really good question. We talked a little bit about tone, and now we can talk about voice. So kind of going through a little bit about what we talk about in the book. I think that often it's like, voice is really just sort of like a property, properties that people establish in order to like align teams of writers together. So, voices, can be kind of like a subjective interpretation of a brand or of a product. And really a lot of times a voice strategy is just like coming up with rules either for yourself or for a team to just kind of like, stay consistent, but also solving a problem or reaching a goal. You have some companies like Slack, for example, who have had sort of like a kind of like specific voice and strategy since the beginning, and like since the start of Slack. And then also like it's something that is the same exact way, no matter if you're using the product or if you're looking at their tweets or if you're getting a support email or talking to somebody in marketing, right? Like their voice strategy is like holistic and like just like runs deep. We actually interviewed Anna Picard, who is the head of brand communications of Slack and is kind of responsible for the Slack voice. And then you have something like Adobe, where we have like all these wildly different products, and the marketing voice, the brand voice, is so much different than the voice that we're trying to like create in product, just because we have different goals, right? Like they are trying to sell you on marketing analytics software, or like creative let's say like create a visual software, and in the product, like our goal is to try to like get somebody to figure out how to use this really complicated piece of software. So so sometimes an in-product voice and a brand voice can be different. And really, you have principles that I think apply more broadly. Like often, like most of the time, you want to be simple, and you want to be straightforward, and you want to be conversational or human or something. And that's not always the case. That's often the case. So oftentimes, your voice principles are somewhere something related to those. But but often, there's other kind of like specifics in there. Like you really are trying to be honest, right? Like you're trying to be humble, or you're trying to be educational, right? You're trying to like teach somebody something, as with Shopify's voice, and then really you're trying to figure out like, what are some specific mechanical ways that you can accomplish that, right? So like if you are trying to be simple, you want to keep your sentences short. You want to use words that are not above let's say 5th grade reading level. That can vary a lot. If you're trying to be knowledgeable, you want to find ways to like guide users through particularly sensitive flows, and that really gives you ammunition for when you go to a PM trying to build like an error message and say, hey, I really need more room to explain to the user what's happening here. That kind of stuff. Sometimes you can use it to build trust, stuff like that. Anything to add to that, Michael?
No, that's
I
great.
didn't mean to just jump on that. Yeah.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Do we agree about this?
Yeah, we agree. Oh, for sure. About everything.
Yeah.
So Sarah Campbell has one, and this was, I think, for you. Wait, hold on one second. Was it Sarah? It was for Andy. Oh no, sorry, it was Heidi. Heidi had a question for Andy. Do you want to share your question, Heidi?
Heidi, I think you're on mute.
I think I'm off now, right?
Oh,
There you go. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Yeah, so that content strategists edit to, hyperlink search and make everything short and to the point. How did that impact engagement? Was there were people clicking it more, engaging, using search more?
Yeah, we're pretty sure. So one of the problems Adobe faces is that we don't have, like, we're only now beginning to like develop a good testing culture. We before Adobe, I worked at Facebook, where they just like test the crap out of everything. And I went to Adobe, and often they didn't even have the infrastructure to test a lot of our like desktop apps. So with some of the mobile apps, we started really getting into it, and we think that this is related to this specifically, but it increased the. No, it didn't increase. It improved the quality of our search queries for that stuff. People were searching a little bit more for like with specific keywords, because it was a little bit closer and more related. People were still in the mindset of the tutorials that they were looking for when they were tapping that button. So if you, let's say, I'm just completely making this up, but say you were looking to like use filter masks better, like cut an image out of a photo. You had you were tapping it when you still had the mindset according to our usability tests. Like the hypothesis is they were still like had the mindset of of the tutorial that they were looking for, rather than just being faced with a search experience that just kind of was blank and open, right? Like it was a little bit more contextually a little bit more contextual.
Just really quickly, what's your take on scrappy testing? Like, say, you just go ahead, make that change, and then see how people engage, versus the only time you can only make a change after you do like a formal A/B test or usability test, stuff like that. Do you do both, or go?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, if you have, if you have a team, or if you have engineers and PMs who are, already thinking about this stuff and kind of like challenging to do it, like, go for it. Like if like at something like Facebook, for example, we had, both like data scientists and user researchers who were, doing like A/B tests kind of in the app, and then also doing like usability studies outside of that. But then again, Facebook has like infinity money to, to do that kind of thing, and often like you have teams that don't have the ability to do it. So I've definitely like I've used usertesting.com before, just like for something I'm like just trying to figure out something small, or I've taken this to a group of people not involved in the product at Adobe to like try something out and see how it goes. So I'm all for scrappy testing, especially if you need something quickly done or something very kind of specific done. That's you've done that too, Michael, right? Like you've been heavily involved in testing and
yeah. Andy and I have been friends for a while, and when I realized that one of the first moments I realized we were working in really different UX spaces was when Andy told me about when you were at Facebook, how you were going on like a 2-week contextual inquiry research trip to Peru or something.
Yeah, specifically for like search results.
Yeah, and I have trouble getting like a day, sometimes, that costs nothing. But, so I think anything you can do is really valuable, and evidence is just so powerful. Any kind of evidence. We had a recent moment where a bunch of our team was together in our Charlotte, North Carolina office, and it was a bunch of people from different offices around the world, and it was a good chance for them to see each other. And one of the things we did was creating paper prototypes, and they were largely content-based, like they mainly consisted of words because we were talking about how to add a vehicle to a policy. And they went out and tested those in the street. They cold approached people, gave them gift cards, and started the testing session. They got coaching from a user researcher on how to do it well. And that was transformative for that team. So that's another thing I would say, like scrappy research, yes, and also involve everyone you can. Get people in contact with users. I love the Jared Spool advice of like just people literally talking to your users, having conversations with them will be a transformative experience. So I think that's a really good thing to do.
Yeah. Heidi, looks like you had a question.
Well, actually, I'd like to suggest we jump ahead to Sarah Campbell's question. Is Sarah still here? Can you ask your question, Sarah?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. I was just curious, a little bit piggybacking off of Michael's example, I think it was, of the security policy, or maybe it's yours, Andy, around the birth date. But for those times when, you're writing UX copy and it surfaces a bigger problem in your opinion, so either a problem in the flow design or even in a policy itself. Any strategies you've used to successfully demonstrate there's a bigger problem and it's not just the writer like coming up empty and not working their magic enough?
Yeah, I feel this. This one hit me in the feels, this question. I think so many people on this call have been there, first of all, where it feels like you're the only one pushing for it or advocating or seeing that it could be a problem. So the first thing I'd say is like, if you've ever felt that way, you're definitely not alone. The other thing I would do is I would just like appeal to the humanity of the situation. That is what has been most successful for me every time I've run into this is tell a story about what it must feel like to be that person. I'm reading a great book right now called The Story Factor by Annette Simmons. And it's all about how to tell stories effectively. I think it's a really useful technique for writers and designers. Anyone having these types of conversations at work, because sometimes people can't be won over by the business case. Sometimes it's really important to just say, like, imagine you were in this situation. One that came up at work was someone wanted to add have a nice day to the end of every chatbot flow for an insurance company. And I was like, imagine that you're chatting with us because your house just burned down and you lost everything. And maybe someone in your family is in the hospital and you're chatting with us because you're just trying to get money back on your policy. And then the bot says, have a nice day. That shut it down immediately. Didn't need to do any user testing or anything like that. So I think that's a really good one. And I think also it's good to, like, I'm not above shaming, like saying, would you really want someone screen capping that and posting it on social media? Is that the story we want to tell about our company? Like those are important things to do as well. I think you can always go after business case, but that I've not, strangely, not had a lot of success with that one. So I don't know. I'd welcome anyone on the call if you have other things you've done in these situations too, because I think it's a common thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone else have a technique in these hairy moments?
These uncertain times.
Andy.
Anybody?
I'm waiting for Katie to chime in. She's done so much of this stuff. Sorry to
Jeez,
put you on
Larry.
the spot. That's what co-organizers do.
Sarah, I think you've hit on something that, like, everybody faces, and nobody has yet found the
The silver
magic
bullet
right?
to solve it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a question that comes up on every webinar, every interview. But yeah, I really like what Michael said about, telling the story, and that definitely resonates. And something that I have been finding especially useful lately, especially working at Google, is documentation is often your friend. Like, create the artifact and push it around and share it out with people. And sometimes just having a common place to reach to can help tell that story. I mean, it's not an instant solution, but sometimes just having it there as a reference point, people will just grab it.
Yeah. And on my team, we're organizationally and also just sort of strategically, we sit very close to the design system team, to Spectrum, which is Adobe's design system, and sometimes I wield that like a sword. I'm just like, hey, Spectrum says, not knowing that I submitted that documentation just like months before. Spectrum says that we're doing it this way, so.
Right. It's not just me. Spectrum is saying that.
It's written down.
Just the messenger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can also invent authority, right? Like, pretend that you are in charge of it. That's one thing I've done before. Like, yeah, I'm sorry, it's just our enterprise strategy, and that's what we're doing. That can also, name drop a VP or two. This person is empowered me to figure out how this works.
Let me bring this up with Sergey.
Right. Exactly.
Paula, you had the next question after Sarah. Do you wanna ask that? Paula.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No
I was kind of simultaneously scrolling back up, and also I was putting together a list of all the things that everyone's been linking to here so that we can share it later. What was my question? This one is a little bit of just having had this experience in the past of working. Maybe this doesn't happen anymore. Hopefully, it doesn't happen anymore. But where design was, and I'm talking about like the creative design, was so far out ahead of the content strategy and the UX that and then of course sold and bought off on by the client. This is when I was working in consulting. That then, as the content strategist, having to kind of reverse engineer or sort of fit ways to get enough content into, this tiny little area that I was granted on the screen to do a product description. Just wondering, does that still happen? And, is it, and if so, has it happened to you guys? And, how do you deal with that? And is there, are there ways that, maybe the whole, role of content designer has sort of, evolved because of that kind of scenario?
Yeah. I mean, I was just working with, our team is mostly working on product design and sort of like very UX-y stuff, but we were putting together an internal website not too long ago, and we spent 30 minutes of the 45-minute meeting talking about like the parallax scrolling behavior that happens on certain elements rather than the actual structure of the pages themselves, which is to say that yes, it definitely still happens. And Yeah, no, I don't think, just like with Sarah's question, I don't think that there's really like a, I mean, again, like, yeah, the story and sort of like, just demonstrating how like, hey, like you've just really constricted, I think something that often happens in this situation is, people will be like, oh, well, people don't really read anymore anyway, right? And then, I'm just like, well, pardon my French, like if nobody reads anymore, like why the hell am I, what, I'm just going to say hell. Why am I here? What's the point of being like, writing words anyway if people aren't reading? And really like, there's research that we can point to that says like, hey, people read when they are searching for signal, like when they're looking to figure out like what they're supposed to do. People will read. So that's, I mean, that's a an argument that I've pulled out a lot. But certainly, with varying levels of effectiveness. Is that something you've faced, Michael?
Yeah, I wish I could say that we've moved beyond this
Yeah.
issue, but I don't think we have. Agile, one nice thing about Agile is that it brings every discipline a little bit closer together. So I think that can be nice because you're talking about the same problem together, ideally, if you're really running with an Agile team and doing the stuff that they do. They call them ceremonies. It's so weird. Why do we call them ceremonies? But anyways, that's what they do. And I think that can help a bit. I also think that like I still hear about it a lot. I don't know if she came up with this, but Rebecca Evanho, who does a lot of conversation design, describes it as filling word holes. So it's like when someone gives you a bunch of word holes to fill, and they're like, "Yeah, you have 15 words for this one." That's a red flag, of like, hey, maybe we should just talk about how to work together first before I start writing this stuff, because it's not a great relationship. I heard, I talked with a French UX writer this morning, Gladys Diandoki, who said, I'm not a rewriter, I'm a writer. So, though, if you've ever felt like that, it's a good chance for you to just talk more with the team about ways of working, and how you can design your workflow, design the way you're passing things between each other to be more effective. Because I think that's a rough spot to be in. So you want to change that. It's well worth the time it takes to build those relationships and try to change the workflow.
Yeah, there's a talk that Jonathan Coleman gave at SOFA conference recently, called "How I Destroyed Content Design," and the sort of the inflammatory message of like that provocative message of that like headline is kind of like hiding the main point he was giving, which is basically like we need to find ways to bring UX writers and content designers and content strategists closer to the product strategy, like getting in earlier and working on less stuff so they can focus and really be involved in that part. And I think that's a good message, right? Like that's like the more upfront, the more front loaded you are when developing a product strategy, is just sort of the more influence and the more like you're in there when things are malleable and easy to change. Steph Hay had a really good quote that we talk about in our book. That's basically, Steph Hay is the she now that just head of UX at Capital One.
VP of design, yeah.
VP of design, sorry. She basically says words are the lowest cost, lowest risk ways to design. So, if you're prototyping with words, if you're, writing outlines, and if you are, thinking about like rather than setting horizontal navigations in stone and actually just like thinking about those like detached, like it's really easy to change stuff around and before things get started baked into the system. So for sure, like being in as early as you can is like Katie Henson says Jonathan will be giving that talk at Design and Content next week. So get ready for an adventure if you're attending that. I lost my train of thought, but yeah, that's being present as early and with as much of the strategy as you can, I think is easier said than done, but certainly the best way to help that. Anything else? I think if I've missed anything, I'm sorry, but I think we went through the list of questions here.
Just want to mention, we do have a website for the book, writingisdesigning.com. and you can also sign up for our newsletter there. After hearing the two of us talk, I can't imagine why you would do such a thing to yourself, but you can do that. And we usually have a pencil of the month because we're pencil nerds. So anyways, that's full transparency. That's what you're signing up for when you do that.
Yeah,
but you're welcome to at that website. Yeah, it's been a wonderful pleasure being with all of you tonight. We are really grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you, Seattle.